I think the biggest thing was you have a message and you don't even know what it is. You need to tune in your message. And because he kept saying, Tammy, your story is incredible. Your resilience is incredible. Your gifts that you can share with other people are incredible, but you have to tune it in. You have to figure out exactly where it is you want to go with it because you're all over the place.
Hello and welcome back to the Ignition Path podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Goodknight, and I appreciate everyone joining us today. Before we go any further and I introduce my guest, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you hear anything during this message and during this podcast, during this YouTube video when you watch it, that resonates with you or anybody that you know, please don't hesitate. Hit that share button and get that over to them so we can help grow our channel and get the information to those who may need it. So today, I am very excited to talk to Tammy Vincent, someone who her and I have played podcast tag throughout the last couple of months. there's been a little bit of the holidays and then the January and then the sickness and then the my sickness, and we finally came to a time where we actually can meet. Tammy, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for having me.
So it's one of those things where I met Tammy in one of my newer groups that is a very active group that we have a lot of people doing a lot of great things for one another. We're supporting each other, and this is one of the things that Tammy and I are doing. She's coming on my podcast to share her background and her information, and I'm going to be going on her podcast to talk about my podcasting stuff and then my background wherever that conversation goes, of course. And today's no different. So Tammy, go ahead and introduce yourself, what your background is. Remember, Ignition Path is that path to entrepreneurship. So maybe what you did prior to becoming an entrepreneur, like explain. If you were always an entrepreneur, that's fine too. But if you worked corporate or were a nurse or anything like that prior to becoming an entrepreneur, talk about what you did prior and then the path, a little bit about the path, about how you got to where you're at right now.
Okay, well, I've done a bunch of different things. One of them was teaching children, and I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit, if that makes sense. So even though I was in a job, I could be in a 9-to-5, I could be a manager at a gas station, didn't matter what I was doing. I was always having that side gig that was be your own boss, do your own thing, have your own stuff, never really embraced the whole corporate world. I did have a job that I started going door to door for sales. And I was like, okay, this is no fun unless I own this company. Like, this is not going to be fun unless I own it. So that was back in 2014, I believe. It was a window and siding company. So I did that for a little bit. I started going door to door, and I said, well, what is my trajectory? Like, what is my path? What is my destiny here? Because it needs to be bigger than door to door. And they said, well, if you work really hard, you can have your own franchise. And I said, okay, that's kind of like being an entrepreneur, right? Yes.
Right.
So I did it, and I went door to door, and I ended up opening 3 cities. So I ended up getting 3 of my own franchises, Denver, Seattle, and Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And had a really good time, but we were all door to door. All our salespeople were door to door. And I just always, even though I was working for myself, it was like, I'm working for myself, but I'm still not doing something I absolutely love. So, I mean, by the grace of God, I don't want to say, yes, it's a good thing that I lost it because of COVID, but I had 17 or 19 salesmen all on the ground doing door-to-door sales when that hit. And obviously that form of marketing was no longer acceptable. So so I went from, it was a tough one. I went from 2.2 million in 2019 to 400,000 in 2020.
Yeah, that's a big hit. Big hit. So you kind of remember I told you before we started recording, I'm like, well, I won't talk too much unless you open up a can of worms. No. So right. Here's something very funny that you did not know, and I didn't know about you, but I installed siding and doors and windows with my father from the time that I was old enough to swing a hammer, essentially, and all the way through college. I helped put myself through college by putting in windows and doors with my dad. So I'm very familiar with that industry, to the point where I actually even was a sales rep for one of the local local, well, I should say the local to Ohio. I think they started in Cincinnati, Champion Windows. A little shout out to Champion. They were great back in the day when I was with them. I'm not sure what they are now, but they had good people back then, and I'm sure they got good people now. But we had a great window. I knew exactly how they wanted to hire me as an installer, but when I had that interview, they're like, "Wow, you do really good in sales. You're very personable, and you understand the concept. You understand how the windows go in. Like none of our sales reps have the experience that you do of like installing the windows." So I was like, "Okay, I'm down with a sales position. I know that makes more money essentially for the most part, to become a sales rep. But you are boots on the ground, and you're subject to the cycle." And when I was doing that, I took a pause from my healthcare division. I stopped working at the hospital because I was getting denied sales rep jobs in the medical industry because I didn't have sales experience on my resume. And I'm like, when I convince a doctor that I need to do a certain thing for a patient, that's a sales position. They're like, I sell every day to make sure, my patients are taken care of on the level that I take care of them on for respiratory therapy. And they're like, nope, you have to have actual sales experience. So I went out and looked at different sales jobs, and I was like, well, I know windows and doors. That'd be, I wouldn't say easy for me to do, but it'd be the transition to sell those things would be understandable to me and my brain. And so I did that. Well, that pause of the healthcare industry and me working for that medical sales was, you had a catastrophic event that ended your time in that. My catastrophic event was 9/11.
Okay.
So 9/11, that morning of, we're doing our debriefing, and someone runs into the debriefing and our day before debriefing, and we always talked about what we sold the day before, yada yada, what our stuff is in our meetings. Somebody runs in, there's a plane that just hit the towers, and we're like, what? And so we got up to watch, and then live watching it in one of the other rooms, we saw the second plane hit. And me being in medical and have a strong medical clinical background, I'm like, I gotta go. I told my boss, Larry Kuhn, shout out to Larry Kuhn, still have contacts with him on Facebook. So shout out to Larry if he's watching this, but he said one of the smartest things ever to me. He's like, Kyle, and I had a baby on the way. My son was born October 29th. 9/11 was, of course, September 11th. And so just a little over a month away from having our baby, and he stopped me in my tracks and said, don't you dare drive to New York. Because I was like, I know how, I'm medical. I've got to drive to New York. I need to save people. I'm not attached to a hospital, but I know what to do. And he's like, don't do it. We don't know what's going on up there. We don't know how widespread this is. And this is before, I think we even knew that the Pentagon happened, but we didn't know that Pennsylvania happened yet. And he like spun me around and I really liked Larry. He was very father figure to me early on in my career with them. And he's like, go home, be with your baby, your soon-to-be baby and your wife. We don't know what's happening. Protect them at all cost. And I'm like, oh shit, you're right. So it was one of those things where I was in the middle of doing exactly what you're doing, medical or sales in windows and doors. I enjoyed the industry. I was able to run my own area, and I started getting to the point where I had my own stuff, kind of like I was an entrepreneur, but I still worked for Champion, of course. So you actually had a company that you were a division, so you were a franchise. So that is entrepreneurial.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Champion was our biggest competitor in Cincinnati because that's where I started in Cincinnati. That's awesome. Where the office was. But and so it was. I got to do it. Served every purpose it needed to serve. My daughter was my partner, so we got to travel. We got to do what I don't want to say what we wanted, but we got to live a great lifestyle, and it served its purpose. I became very good at sales, which if you're a parent, you're good at sales. I don't care what they say. So you should be able to put parenting on your sales resume anytime that you're a parent, right? If you're a parent, you're selling something every single day.
Heck yeah.
So, no matter what they say.
That is so true.
Yeah. But when it was over and I was like, okay, am I really in love with windows and siding? And I was like, no, I'm not. So I'm in love with helping people combat the childhood that I grew up in. And that's where I turned all of my energy. So I had been a certified life coach for years just because it was something that interested me, but I didn't really see anybody using it back then. So I just turned all my efforts to there. I wrote a couple books. on the topic. I began, just reaching out to schools and just talking to whoever would listen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I do now. So that's still, again, I cannot even fathom putting myself in a cubicle 9 to 5 on somebody else's watch and dime. Just not gonna happen.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm still medical, I'm still clinical, but it's a little different because being a paramedic now. Back then, I was a respiratory therapist and worked in hospitals, and that is 12 hours a day, 3 days a week, blah blah blah. Whereas a paramedic, you are every third day, and you have when you're off, when you're not being a paramedic, you have days off, and that's when I created a couple of different businesses, handyman, my voiceover business, and now my podcasting business and my podcast production business. So yeah, it's one of those things where I've always kind of been, I got it honestly, my dad was an entrepreneur. I saw him have his own business in handyman. I saw him have his own territory as a sales rep that he got to and deal with a whole entire region on a very small company. So he was still an entrepreneur. Even when I was in medical sales, yes, I worked for a company, but I was able to operate my territory as I saw fit. So this is very entrepreneurial, even though there was somebody else, that was dealing with stuff, or, the end result was someone else. So tell me more about the life coaching and when, you sprinkled a little bit about that you had some experience in that, but what was one of the, on Ignition Path podcast, we talk about the path that we come through it. So as you came through that path, COVID kind of forced us all to do weird, different things, right? To do things, to pivot. People have heard me talk about different pivots and whatnot, and pivot into a different direction. So what was one of the hardest things you had to do during that pivot that provided for your family? Like how long did it take you to make that pivot where you could start? I mean, I know how much money you can make at selling windows and doors.
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with the lucrative division that is. So when it comes to that pivot and what you ended up, going into, where did that sit on you when it came to doing it?
Well, that was a struggle, just because, like I said, my business literally, dropped 90% in 3 months. Like, it was bam. It
Yeah.
was going from 2.2 million to 400,000, and it's hard to come back from that. But, at that point, it was almost like I didn't really have to pivot into that loss of income, because I didn't transition voluntarily, if you could say that. So I had none. Like, so had I stayed at my other job, well, job I say, but meaning my business, I would have had none. So it was very easy to kind of say, okay, well, something is better than nothing. But I honestly shifted my mind into it's not so much the income as it's the flexibility, it's the lifestyle, and it's the freedom, and it's doing what you love. And I say that even if you're an entrepreneur, if you're not doing what you love, you might as well not, because
Yeah.
you really, like, you're in medical. Obviously you love we've talked about it on the phone. You light up, it lights you up to save people and to help people and to have those skills and to be able to use them. So you're going to do something with that productive. But I was just not loving what I was doing. So to me, I pivoted into more of okay, we're going to do this and we're going to take it and run and kind of just see where it goes, see where it takes me. And it's been probably, I want to say, about 2 years and a half that I've actually been doing it now. And I'm just now really starting to get my feet on the ground and really start making some forward momentum.
Fantastic. Yeah. And that's that's another thing when it comes to, being an entrepreneur, it's the momentum. And, I'm not sure how much you deal with, or if you've ever done any of the self-help stuff from Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi. They spend a lot of time on momentum. That's something that they really, really beat the drum on. And once you have a win, you have to piggyback on that win and go to the next thing. So talk a little bit about momentum, and what was it that gave you your first piece of momentum, per se?
Honestly, I think it was when I was in the airport with my friend, and literally it was like my first major aha moment, because I had gone through, okay, so I went, little backstory. Both my parents alcoholics. I had gone through a tremendous amount of every kind of abuse and neglect that you can think of. And so I went into adulthood with a lot of mindset shifting that needed to be done as far as money and as far as relationships, as far as everything. So in this 30 years, literally, that I was spending with what like the Tony Robbins kind of people. I remember walking on fire at his convention. Did you
So
do
you
that?
did do some of that stuff. All right, great.
Yeah.
I did the convention, but it was all virtual still. Or it was virtual then. There was no in person when I did it. But I still want. That's one of my life goals is to get one of his true conventions. So
life changing. It was fun. I got to walk on the coals and all that stuff with like 10,000 other people, 20,000 other people. But it wasn't, it was just knew I had to, like, I shifted that way. So I had all these tools. So I went through hypnotherapy myself. I went through therapy. I did EFT tapping and learned all these holistic methods to calm my own nervous system.
Like, there's so many things that we have in common. It's crazy now that I'm like, we never talked about any of this stuff.
Really?
There's so many things that I've done in my past and things that, alcoholic father now, mind you, he was done being an alcoholic before I was born. I'm the last of four. Yep. I know. I'm the mistake of the family, but 8 years later than my closest sibling. So oops, but hey, mom always said that, I was her best oops. So,
I guess that's a good compliment.
Yeah. Whatever.
If I had to make a mistake, you might as well be it.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a whole other story about that, and ended up meeting people many years later after my mom passed away, and getting and connected with people that I never knew were her friend. I never knew them, but they knew my mom when I was born, and they reached out to me after my mom passed away in 2000 and started telling me some stories about the time frame around when I was born, and it was very moving. It was very, she had never told me these things. She had never shared that stuff that she had talked to other people about me and the stress of having a new baby 8 years after the last sibling, and all that. So when it comes to the things that you and I have in common now that we're getting to know each other better, it's no wonder how that there's just certain people you connect with, and you're one of those type of people that hearing your story, hearing your background of all the different things, not just being an entrepreneur, but your previous businesses and that kind of stuff, and then your family stuff, it's not surprising to me that I've met you and that we were put in the path of one another in our entrepreneurial, flow.
I'm definitely starting to see that. When we met on Lauren, the first thing she said the day after she met you is, Tammy, you got to meet this guy, Kyle.
And she said, Kyle, you got to meet Tammy. Like, you were the first person in that group. She's like, you got to meet her. And we did. We introduced each other very quickly, but then it took us 2 months, 3 months to actually.
Couple small little things.
Life.
Just little things.
But we let it roll off her shoulders.
Yep. That's funny.
So momentum. Sorry, back to momentum.
Back to momentum. Yeah, we're lagging on the momentum.
Like we could almost have like a therapy session here between the two of us. No.
Right. But so after like 30 years of doing all this stuff to really overcome all this stuff and kind of just step out as me, I guess, if you could say the best way to put it. And I mean, I knew I was an entrepreneur because maybe it was because I didn't like authority and I didn't like to work for other people and I didn't like to be told what to do because I'd been controlled my whole life. So maybe that's why I had that. Part of that might have been why I wanted to do my own thing. But I was at the airport one day, and this is really before I really started the coaching. I had a certificate and everything, but I was in Vegas with a friend and we were going to a business workshop, and they were all entrepreneurs that I was going with. I met Jack Canfield that day and just some really cool people. And we're on the way on the workshop, and I'm at the airport and I was doing EFT tapping with a lady, and I'd never met her. She was sitting next to me and she was clearly afraid to fly. Her knee was going up and down. She looked like she was getting ready to have an anxiety attack. And I said, hey, you don't know me. My name's Tammy. Are you afraid to fly? And she said, yes. And I said, can you give me 7 minutes of your life? And she said, I don't know. I said, just follow along with me. If it doesn't work, we have nothing to lose, but let's just try this. So we tapped out EFT tapping. For those of you that don't know what it is, it's
that was my next question. Once you got done, I was like, make sure we talk about what it is.
I'll explain it a little bit briefly. It's called emotional freedom technique. And what it is it's literally tapping on the meridian points of your body. They're like on your head, right here, on your chin. And it's literally like just the easiest, quickest way to say it is just you've got these meridian points and you're refocusing energy to them while you're saying like affirmations and talking through. So anyway, I did this with her and for about 7 or 8 minutes and she skipped onto the plane. She said, she's like, thank you so much. I don't even know who you are. I don't know how to repay you. And I said, don't worry. I said, just, she goes, this is the first time I've flown without a Valium in 20 years. And I was like, well, God bless you, have a good
That's
day.
great.
And we got on the plane and my friend said to me, what the hell was that? Like she said, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know. She was afraid to fly and I was afraid I was going to have to sit next to her. And I said, and I know how to help her. So why not? And that's when my friend was like, you have got to take all of these gifts and all of these things you've learned behind the scenes when nobody else knew you were even doing this stuff and use it. And that is what finally triggered me like, okay, I got this. I can do this. And that was what set the ball rolling. Like, okay, how can I do this? Well, I can get on podcasts and I can start talking to people and I can do a course and I can start coaching and using some of these gifts. And that's what started the momentum.
That's great. That's
that was
great.
a long
And
story.
then no, that's okay. Yeah, we had a little side stories in there too. When it comes to that momentum, and you mentioned that you started to create courses, did you do anything formally, or did you already? You said you had a background of being a teacher as well, or did you already kind of know how to start building it? So talk a little bit about when you finally made the decision that you wanted to help people in this way and pivot completely away from something that was comfortable and lucrative. But tell us about what you did to learn what you already had or what you were going to be doing, or if you already knew it, like what did you have to do to like make sure you gave yourself enough information to do what you needed to be doing in the future?
Well, first I thought I was going to get it all for free and I was just going to binge watch all these free courses that you could take on business this and business that and starting a business and writing a course and all that. And then I realized that you have to pick one person who you believe has the skill and the knowledge, and you have to take everything they say and listen to them. That, those free courses are great, don't get me wrong, but it's a teaser. It's saying, it's the what, but it's not the how of how to be successful in whether it's doing an online course or social media, whatever it is. So after about 1.5 years of binge watching all of those free courses, I did actually sign up with a business coach who gave me a structure, who gave me, this is what you need to do. Everything else, let it go.
Let it go, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I love Frozen, but yeah, and that's a great point, and this is just too crazy how parallel we are. Because when I started voiceover business, one of the first people I ever talked about voiceover told me, you need to have a coach. Don't go into it with a name like Goodknight. Don't go into voiceover because that's very memorable, and that's not a stage name. That's real, and
Right.
like there's only one Kyle Goodknight spelled the way I do it. And there's only one Kyle Goodknight without the K out there in the world. And I met him once through Facebook, but it was very, very obvious that getting that coach for that voiceover was needed, and help me build it the right way. And that's probably, and I think you would agree, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that entrepreneurs do wrong when they're trying to do their own coaching business or their own side business, is they don't get a mentor that is someone. They get advice, of course. I mean, I've had tons of advice from people in the past, and when it comes to coaching, that was one of probably the smartest advice that anybody ever gave to me. So I dove deep into it. I interviewed like 11 different coaches for my voiceover business, and then when I started my first responder division of my business, which is first responder mental health support, I grabbed a coach to help me with things. And then, of course, my podcasting business now, so I kind of wear 3 different hats. I do voiceover very, very few and far between nowadays, but the voiceover experience has allowed me to podcast. The voiceover experience allowed me to understand audio and help me with coaching other people that want to do podcasting, what audio is and how to explain it to them and how to address the microphone properly. So all of that stuff adds up. And the coaches that I've had, the 3 different coaches, my voiceover coach, and I've had several different coaches inside of my voiceover business, but my main voiceover coach that I had when I first got it, he told me, he's like, you're going to use voiceover and you're going to use it as a springboard. And that's exactly what podcasting is. It was that. And I didn't know what it was at that time. I had no idea what he meant, and so coaches see things in us. So talk a little bit about what maybe one of the things that your coach saw in you that gave you support and gave you what you may not even have known that you needed yet. But then when you look back on those beginning days of coaching, you were like, oh my gosh, that's what they mean.
I think the biggest thing was you have a message and you don't even know what it is. You need to tune in your message. And because he kept saying, Tammy, your story is incredible. Your resilience is incredible. Your gifts that you can share with other people are incredible, but you have to tune it in. You have to figure out exactly where it is you want to go with it because you're all over the place.
Yeah.
And that was really, and he's like, get your message, fine tune your message, and be able to say that message to anybody, anywhere you go, the same way and have it have the same effect on them. And I think that was the biggest thing because I was all over the place and I still am a little bit. I'm gonna be honest because I like to try different things. I like to, just like when I was,
and that's okay.
When I had anxiety and really like debilitating anxiety and people were like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And I said, I'll do it all. I'll throw every single piece of spaghetti at the wall and one of them's going to stick.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, I think that's the natural when you are an entrepreneur and you're starting out, you don't know it's going to stick until something sticks. That's why the coaches are so good because they rein you in. We get the shiny object syndrome where we're all over the place. And then every single offer you get and every single suggestion you get looks better than the next. But the grass is not always greener. And it's kind of like picking a multi-level marketing company. I said, I'm decent at sales now. So I could pick any one.
Right.
And as long as I believe in the product, if I commit 100% to that company, I could sell it.
Yeah.
And it's the same concept. Pick what you want to do and focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we've spoke a little bit about anxiety. You've spoke about it. Our paths are very parallel. I've mentioned that. That kind of really plays into my sponsor. And it plays into the entrepreneurial person, when it comes to what entrepreneurs have to deal with, especially making a life change like you and I both did to become an entrepreneur, to make that decision, to make that pivot. Those are going to be some pretty anxious times. And, being a first responder and having the knowledge and the unfortunate, traumas that I've seen and loss of life and, life-saving stuff, there's a lot of stuff in my life that I didn't know was adding up in my cup. And I had a point in time where I was in the middle of building my businesses. I still had all of the stuff going on with the first responder stuff, and I met my sponsor, Daniel Packard, who I'll play a little video here in a minute about what he does and what he did, but helping me control that part of it and realize that it wasn't just the medical side of me that was it, that the anxiety was coming from, that it was the life stuff and the new business and the possible failure of the business and how to package that. So it's a very important, and that's why I have my sponsor be a sponsor of both. He's my sponsor for my other podcast, which is First Responder Mental Health. It's a perfect, sponsor for that. And it's a perfect sponsor for, business podcasts like this, where people that are listening to this may be going through a time where they feel anxious, they feel overwhelmed, and his program could be a possible solution. It's, everything in the world. I've done multiple things. I've done my own. I did EMDR, which is the different type of tapping and different type of stuff when it came to therapy. But, and I know what your type of, what you talk about with what did you call it? ET. Sorry, the tapping. What is the EFT? So many, and ACLS and PALS and ITLS and all the different acronyms that I have in my brain from medical. It's like I can't keep them all straight all the time. So having different tools, that's one of the big things I talk about on my other podcast. I don't go on a podcast and preach only one thing, I bring people in that may have alternate ways of dealing with stuff. So right now we're going to take a real quick pause for my sponsor, Daniel Packard, and you'll hear all about that here right now. Let me ask you a question. Would your life be better if whatever you're struggling with, you could finally break free of? So what am I talking about? The Funky Five. What's the Funky Five, you ask? It's those oh-so-familiar struggles, procrastination, people-pleasing, perfectionism, low self-confidence, and the one I call the big A, anxiety. For years, I struggled to manage my own version. I call them my funky three. I had 3 of these funky 5 weighing me down. I've tried just about everything to deal with them. Then a guest on my podcast, Daniel Packard, shared with me a profound thought that I had never thought of. So Daniel, a UC Berkeley engineer, spent 8 years working with this team and over 3,000 people to create an approach that doesn't just help you manage these issues. It actually frees you from them by getting right to the root of what's holding you back. So after meeting with Daniel, I decided to give it a shot, and within 6 short weeks, gone. Truly gone. I was so amazed. The number one thing I was dealing with was procrastination. But miraculously, a deeper-rooted struggle with people-pleasing, something I'd been unknowingly battling for a lifetime, lifted entirely. And the anxiety that came with them both, gone as well. Are you tired of battling any of your funky 5s? People-pleasing, procrastination, perfectionism, low self-confidence, and the biggest happy killer of them all, the A word, anxiety. Imagine how much better life would be if you weren't just managing these things, but free of them, quickly, and yes, permanently. If you're ready for a real solution, head to danielpackard.com and get his free 90-minute training. Daniel himself will walk you through what makes his approach so different and teach you a technique you can use immediately to start feeling the difference. So if any of the Funky 5, or maybe your own version of the Funky 5, are holding you back, don't wait. Visit danielpackard.com. You can truly get results and start living the life you want. Okay, and now we're back from listening to what Daniel Packard has to offer. Please don't hesitate if you ever have any type of those funky 5 that he talks about. I had 3 of the funky 5. So if you had any of those funky 5s at all, reach out to him, have that conversation. It was a life-changing experience for myself. But just reach out to Daniel if you have any of those funky 5, because he definitely helped me and look at my life in a different way, which supported my business and supported my family as well. So now we're back with Tammy Vincent. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Tammy's going to talk a little bit more about her system and how you can get a hold of her. I know that the last segment we talked about the pivot. We talked about momentum. When I had my pivot, it was kind of my momentum at the same time within a 30-day period. That's when I decided to start my podcast. Was my pivot. My podcast was the pivot I had to do to make sure that the other stuff that I was planning on doing fell into the right place and became an authority in the space. So talk a little bit more when it comes to what your podcast does. I know that you have a podcast, and I'm going to be on yours. So talk about your podcast and where that falls in line with what you're doing with your coaching business.
Okay, so the name of the podcast is Adult Child of Dysfunction, Thriving After Chaos. So it is literally all stories of resilience, hope, healing, people that went through bad stuff, people that had a tough life, people that, we all have stuff happen to us, but some of us don't deal with it as well as others, and some of us aren't given the tools. So I have experts come on there. I do a lot of different types of guests. I'm getting ready to have somebody come on and teach you how to do self-hypnosis so that you can hypnotize yourself into a better state of mind. I have people come on that just talk about their experiences and how they rose above and how they came out stronger, because that's what I do. I do a lot of mindset work with people. I mean, when you grow up in the type of dysfunction that a lot of us grew up in, you have a couple underlying beliefs that follow you into adulthood, whether you like it or not. And those are: you're not worthy, you're not good enough, you're
people
just not.
pleasing,
people
exactly.
Pleasing, perfectionism.
Yeah, one of the funky, all those are all the funky 5. Anxiety, It's one of those things where someone watching this is going to see me talk about the funky 5, and now you're literally backing that up without even knowing anything about Daniel. So,
well, that's funny. Maybe you could sponsor my podcast too someday.
Exactly.
So yes, and that's what I do. So it leads into, we might have a conversation about people pleasing, and that leads into them coming if they want to know more. I always leave it open. If you want to know more, we can work on a one-on basis. We can work, in group coaching. You can grab my course. I have a course. My signature course is called Trials to Triumph. and it goes through all of the aspects. It's like an 8-week guided course that goes through all of the, subconscious versus conscious and everything that you need to know to rewire your brain from
Yeah.
a beginning life of mishap.
Oh my gosh. It's crazy because it's the wiring. Like literally that's the huge message, is that we have to rewire ourselves. And that our nervous system is a huge part of our success. And how do we do that? And it's not just all about breath work, or it's not all about, but yes, there is fight or flight and cortisol and, epinephrine and all that stuff that we have to deal with that raises our heart rate, and breathing does bring it down. And I've had a breathing exercise, a breathing coach come on one of my podcasts early on, and she spoke about the science behind it. And it's real. That is stuff that is not voodoo medicine. So that's one nice thing I like about the different types of things that I've gone through, whether it be personal or because of my business or whatever stressors that have gotten into me, and how to deal with it, is that when me being medical and then hearing someone say you need to retrain your nervous system. And that set so well with me, because it's like no different than I've had shoulder surgeries and knee surgeries. I've had to have physical therapy. That mental health side of me, one of the big things when I've heard a couple of people talk in the healthcare and first responder mental health arena, they talk about, physical therapy of your muscles and bones. There's no difference than physical therapy of your brain and nervous system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what we do. And I have a lot of experts come on, and I do my own work too. I mean, I do somatic work with people, and we can learn to be aware and learn to ease some tension in a certain part of your body. And, I use my stroke as an example. Boy, if I didn't have the training I had, I would have freaked out when I had my stroke.
So yeah, just to back up why it took us so long to get a hold of one another, Tammy suffered a stroke in the middle of few weeks after we met.
Yeah.
You sent me we're trying to contact Ryan, you're like, hey, sorry, I wasn't ghosting you or something along those lines, but I had a stroke and I'm just now 4 or 5 days post stroke, and I'm going into my follow up, and I'm like, wait a minute, time out. I'm like, please focus on everything you first. Like, these podcasts are not that important, but I mean, unless they are, someone out there having issues and we're talking about some different things, reach out to Tammy, reach out to me, reach out to Daniel, and find out what, one of these things because I'm telling you, there is a happier life out there. If you're dealing with and this wasn't supposed to turn into a therapy podcast or anything like that, but it is a big part of our entrepreneurial path, is the anxiety that can come from it, the failures and how you approach that, failing forward, taking every time you've ever had a mistake happen or something that didn't go your way, and then making if you're not in the right headspace, how do you turn that to a positive? And that's one of the big things that I can do now is, my podcast I was literally getting ready to give up my business. And I said, you know what? One last-ditch effort. I know how to podcast. I've helped people podcast before. I've been a producer of podcasts. Let me start my own podcast and let me pivot away from the way I was doing it for my business. And as soon as I started recording my podcast, and that was the First Responder podcast, and then the Ignition Path podcast came after that, and that because of all of that, I met different people. I actually met... Most likely, you met the guy that really helped me pivot, which was Dave Albin, who was Tony Robbins' firewalking captain for 20 years. Mm-hmm. So depending on when you did that, you may have had Dave be the one at the very end that grabbed you off. He was the one that prepared all the fire. So he prepares all of the coals. And there's an art to it, and there's a science to it. And Tony only trusted one person for many, 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 many years until that person was able to, share the knowledge. But Dave Albin, he's going to be on my podcast. I'm actually helping him with his podcast when he launches it. So because I met him through the process of podcasting, now I'm back helping him on a podcast that helps first responders.
Nice.
And women and children of abuse. Like, holy crap, look at this huge, this circle. Like, Oh my gosh, if I didn't pivot and embrace podcasting, I would have never met Dave. I would have never known that he was trying to start a podcast. I would have never told him, hey, listen, I'm a first responder and I'm a podcast producer. And he was like, wait a minute, I've been trying to meet you. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I told somebody, and he goes, I told myself I will meet the right person who understands the first responder role and understands podcasting, because he's like, I don't know podcasting. I know how to be a guest, but he's like, I don't know how to produce my own podcast. So I'll be doing that for him. And it's so funny that our paths have kind of taken the same thing. We've gone through the same struggles and come out with the same positive attitude. So real quick before we end, just make sure, so people, let's talk about your podcast one more time, how we find your podcast, and and then we probably won't. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about something totally different when I come on your podcast. Like we won't probably talk about anything business. With what your podcast is about, there's definitely parts of me that we may need to even have another pre-call so I can kind of open up a little bit more, because there are parts of that part of me that are very helpful and very understanding and could probably support someone that's listening to that podcast to understand that, hey, listen, here's somebody who, is a successful medical person who has multiple jobs and has a family, and he had issues and he came through it. Like, okay, that's a positive message. So we'll talk about that at another time. But yeah, tell us more about your podcast, how you find it, what platforms it's on, and then anything else you want to talk about. And after that, we'll wrap things up and call it a podcast.
Well, sounds good. Well, the name of it is Adult Child of Dysfunction, and you can find it really on any Apple, Spotify, any of the major podcast platforms.
YouTube, is it on YouTube?
I'm putting them on there little by little. So
Okay.
I think I have 157 episodes and only 42 are on YouTube right now,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I'm getting there.
Well, YouTube's one of the biggest podcasting platforms now, because when you set it up the right way, it's not only a video podcast, but they also do the audio as well, and it's actually bigger than the other two now. So that just happened.
Yeah, and I think I need to stop and pause. Maybe I'll talk to you about that and set it up right, because right now I'm just uploading videos. Like it's I need to do it
sense.
right, but a lot of people are like, well, I want to see it on YouTube. I'm like, okay, let me throw it up there.
Yeah, that's what you want to make sure that you do, is when you do set it up. And like I said, that's a whole other conversation. The reason why we podcast is now we found the place where I need to help you, and I've found the place where you need to help me. So
there you go. Perfect. So so you can go on there, and that's really, honestly, if you can get to my podcast, everything you need to know about me is on there, because in my show notes, I have a place to book a chat. If you want to come on my podcast, I have a link so you can come on SpeakPipe and ask out loud, and I can answer you on the podcast, which is fun, which I wish more people would take advantage of.
Yeah, you have to tell me. Like, I didn't know about that. That'd be cool to.
Super cool. Like, it's called SpeakPipe. So you just go to speakpipe.com/Tammy Vincent Coaching, and you can manually talk 90 seconds. You can ask a question, and then I can incorporate it into the podcast and answer it online.
So
live.
like a desynchronized question and answer about your podcast. So people may have to have a little bit of knowledge about your podcast, but then they go on that other one, ask a question that they want answered on your podcast, and you address that the next time you have a podcast that's in that area.
So I would probably, I do guests and I do solo episodes. So if something comes in on SpeakPipe, I will probably incorporate my solo episode around that.
Or if your guest is part of a SpeakPipe, question, then yeah.
Yep. And because people like to hear some people like to hear their voice on podcasts. And, they'll share it with their friends if they're like, hey, listen, she answered my question on this podcast.
What's the number one thing in the world? I mean, if any good coach has always told anybody, what's the number one thing that people want to hear the most?
Themselves.
Their own name. Their own name,
right?
They want to hear their own name, whether they get embarrassed or not. It gives them validation, So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's funny.
So anyway, that's the easiest place to reach me, because all of my links are there.
And of course, we'll have them all in our show notes as well. That'll a link to her podcast, a link to her pages, all that stuff will be in our show notes. She'll send me an email afterwards with all that stuff in it, so you can find it in here or on her podcast. So, Tammy, thank you so much for coming on the Ignition Path podcast. I know it sounds like you and I could just talk shop for hours. I know it. So some of the shared experiences, some of the struggles we've both shared, it's kind of one of those things where when you meet the right people, you realize it and you just instantly become comfortable with them, and know that you're going to be around them and have a relationship with them, from this point forward. And there's people already that I want to introduce you to, and I'm sure there's people that you want to introduce to me. So that's another big thing of why we podcast is I know several nuggets now that I didn't know prior to, even with our conversations prior to this. This podcast has actually given me more people to connect with Tammy to one, support her and help her or help her clients that may need the help. And I know that's reciprocal because once again, Lauren would have never introduced us if she didn't think that we were some way connected, and we are. That's for sure after this recording.
Yeah, absolutely. More now than ever. I had no idea. So this is amazing.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Ignition Path podcast. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you hear a message or anything about our podcast today that you want someone else to hear that you feel that resonates with you or could with them, don't forget, super easy on your phones that most people are listening to or watching these podcasts. There's a little share button on every platform. You kick that over into a text message to your friend, and now they have access to the same thing and say, hey, this person talked about this, and this. I think it'd help you. So that's a big part of what I do all of my podcasts for, so we can share the information. So that's probably the biggest thing I want you to do is share. Another thing, I used to tell people just to write a comment in the notes, and I'll answer your questions. But it sounds like I've got a new tool to start looking into. But for now, go ahead, and as always, I look through every episode. I go back and I look at any type of questions or comments that come about on any of the platforms that people can leave comments. So leave a comment if you want to share, you have something to say about something we talk about. Question, comments are very, very welcomed on our platform. So Tammy, once again, thank you so much for coming on the Ignition Path podcast, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Ignition Path, fueling the entrepreneurial fire.